Well, Set 7 has been out for a couple of weeks, and it's been really interesting to see how all of that has come about, with especially the decks that have been making waves in this current Set 7 meta. There have been a lot of tournaments that have been going on, especially a big one that had over 300 people be able to compete in that one. So it's really interesting to see what then might be the top 5 decks in this Set 7 meta. We're going to be looking at those deck lists right here, right now, and without any further ado, let's get started. So with that, we're going to be looking at pretty much what my opinion is on what the top 5 decks of this new meta is going to be. So there's going to be maybe a little bit of disagreement here on that, and that's perfectly fine. You're more than welcome to be able to do that. Just go ahead and do it in the comments so my video gets boosted. It helps both of us out here. It gets your aggression out, and it gets me some more views. So with that being said, guys, the biggest thing that I was really thinking about with this set was not only necessarily the how it was necessarily performing in the meta, but also just how its matchups are, from deck to deck. How does, Aggro, Amethyst Steel face off against Blue Steel? How does it face off against Ruby Sapphire? Where does it have an advantage? Where does it not? Things of that nature. But I did that for each and every deck, not just necessarily on how it was performing. And so it's been really interesting to take a look at how these decks have been developing. And we've even seen a little bit of a difference coming up, especially in the recent decks as well, which has been Amethyst Emerald, which has been going more discard heavy on that front and seeing some success, especially in tournaments from this last coming weekend. And so there's a lot of things that are going to be maybe changing within these next couple of weeks, but until then, we are going to be talking about what I think so far the top 5 decks in this set is so far. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. So with that being said, guys, first and foremost, we are going to be looking at some aggro here. Now, it's going to be an interesting one. The main reason is that it hasn't necessarily done great, but it hasn't necessarily done bad either. And it has some really good matchups that, especially going against items. Items can really struggle against this deck just because of how fast it can necessarily move. That's going to be something very difficult to have to take on in that case. It also does a good job of having a good stage presence and being able to build up its board state while also maintaining a lot of card draw and gaining a lot of lore. If you just happen to take out a couple of characters in the meantime, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to necessarily be winning ahead of this deck. That, in fact, once it goes ahead and gets over 10 lore, the game can end very quickly with these combinations here. And so you just got to be a little bit careful about how you deal with this deck and not necessarily count it out at any time. Now, at the same time, the Benja is a pretty good card as well, being able to get rid of an item or also being able to quest for 2 as a 3/3 for 3. That's going to be a great matchup right there for, being able to take out the Lucky Dimes and slowing down your opponents on being able to gain a lot of lore while also being able to quest for 2 on its own as well after the fact. Also being able to bounce back with things as well, like with going on the snake and then being able to bounce back the things that you need. The Peats, for example, stopping your opponent from playing actions and things of that nature can be very helpful as you go about this. And so with that being said, it's a very interesting idea and concept, but I do put this at number 5 of the best decks in the meta just because it still doesn't necessarily be consistent enough to really send waves throughout the meta in that case. And so that can be a pretty big difference maker in the matchups that it necessarily is going to have. Does it have good, matchups in the sense of, going against anything outside of items? Yeah, sure, but it doesn't necessarily be anything to write home about. But still, every single weekend, we do see it at least in the top 10, if not in the top 6, on a major tournament. What's also really interesting, if you go ahead and look at other deck lists as well in the tournaments that are being reported on Inked Decks, is that they're actually very character focused and not very song or item focused at all, or even location focused. This build that we have right here is a little bit different in the sense of it actually has, this is my family. But we're even seeing builds online in the tournaments that aren't even running anything outside of Strength of a Raging Fire. That's the only action location, anything outside of characters that is currently being ran is, you're running 35 characters or 30 characters or what have you. And then, Strength of a Raging Fire, and that is it. It is a almost race to the finish. And the biggest thing too is outside of no removal, there is also a lower point of evasive out there as well, which is making Genie coming back into the meta as well. Now, of course, Ruby Amethyst is not too viable of a deck this meta, but even still, there also is a very low count of evasive, which is what is giving, the Genies and even like the Go-Go's and things of that nature as well a lot of really good, board presence in here, being able to quest for a lot. And unless you have the direct removal, they're able to stay on the board and just continually quest for you as you go. And so that's been the sad part. And just as a forewarning, in my top 5 list of the decks, we are not going to be seeing Ruby Amethyst. I would probably put that at 6, maybe 7th, but we're just not seeing it be well played in the meta currently, especially in the tournaments that we have been seeing. But I think that's also mainly because a lot of people have been necessarily scared away from the color combination, not that it's not viable. And so once I think people do get over the fear of and also the belief that Ruby Amethyst might not be the most viable deck out there anymore, I think that's not necessarily true. At the same time, though, I think, yeah, again, once we actually start seeing people going in and playing the deck a lot more and it actually doing well again, people will warm back up to it and you'll see it break into the meta again. But without that, we'll see what happens. And so, deck number 4 is going to be Discard. I hate Discard. Straight up. I respect the deck, but I don't love it. The fact of the matter is, even if I do beat this deck, I don't necessarily feel all that great about it at all, period. It's just not a fun deck to go against, but it does a great job of doing what it does. Diablo is back as well, and the interesting about that as well is that you're not necessarily seeing anyone run Fire the Cannons or that easy removal, which is actually a little bit surprising considering the impact of Oswald and, other low-cost characters that you could be getting rid of pretty quickly. Now, of course, counter to that, the Bell being a 3/3 kind of makes it a lot more difficult to being able to run an uninkable 2 damage card. But even still, the fact of the matter is that we have a lot of cards that would definitely be taken care of very quickly if we did have a Fire the Cannon. Still, with that being said, there is still a lot of removal. Strength of a Raging Fire is a very permanent card in every single Steel deck. You're going to be seeing 4 of them, plain and simple. Let the Storm Rage on is also a better version of Fire the Cannons because you are able to get the card draw off and you are able to, get the song as well. The difficult part is, though, you might not be able to sing it. But still, going back to this deck, though, it is a great deck for what it is able to do. The only problem is, though, and the reason why this deck isn't necessarily higher on the list is because when you are going against Blue Steel Aggro, which is a very permanent deck in this meta right now, you are going to be struggling, plain and simple. Alice's come into the fact they're able to have ward and they're able to give ward to other characters in play. And that's just going to really affect anything that you might be bouncing back or causing to be discarded because Steel, or Amethyst, or not Amethyst Steel, Sapphire Steel does a really great job at being able to get out its cards very fast, very effectively, quest for a lot, and then just play with the top deck that they draw, and that is it. Still, though, this deck is very good at what it is able to do. And especially with the Ursulas coming in, being able to do Let the Storm Rage on, singing that out, dealing 4 damage, drawing 2 cards, Strength of a Raging Fire being able to go off twice even as well with the Ursula and things of that nature is great. At the same time, though, there is so much removal in this game. Everyone and their dog is playing a form of Steel pretty much. And so because of that, you're not going to necessarily be able to, have the Diablo survive and get a lot of card draw. And that's difficult too, where if you go ahead and shift him in, with a discarding of an action, that can really actually hurt you more than it helps you if you're only able to basically replace itself with a one-time card draw. that's something that you definitely have to be, considering as you go about playing this. Now, at the same time, one thing that's really interesting too, though, if this deck can start getting some good card draw as it continues to develop its board, this can be a scary deck in the meta and something to be, very mindful of. And you almost got to be a little bit careful, especially if you're not playing blue steel aggro. You got to be careful about how you maneuver around this deck, and you almost got to play expecting certain cards to be coming up, and expecting that you very well might be discarding a whole ton of cards from your hand as well. One of the biggest things that I absolutely love about this deck, of course, is the new Pete that they were able to add into this, and the fact that you're able to go, a turn 3 Pete and then a turn 4, Space Pirate Pete. Whoo, that's pretty good. And the biggest thing too about that makes this so good is because it's basically a Cogsworth without the ward, but it's able to give everything a resist, including itself. And that one resist, I don't know what it is about just adding one more hitbox basically on each opponent, but it becomes so difficult to be able to take out a lot of characters on the discards board. It's just tough. And especially with Beast coming in and then also having the ability to either draw a card or it gets +4 attack if it has damage on it, can just really help to manage the board state and get things going. Quest for a lot if you want, or just go ahead and attack into a lot of things. And then being able to have that resist +1 with the Pete as well, that is scary. Not only that, but you also could get the Beast in a little bit early with the Morph as well. At the same time, though, unfortunately, I feel like, especially in this scenario, the Ursula is just a little bit too slow in this meta because of how much removal is out there. At the same time, if your Ursula is going to be able to stay out of the board first or stay onto the board first, great. If it's even able to go off once, you're able to get ahead in a lot of ways. But at the same time, having a Bell just come in and sing Strength of a Raging Fire and taking it out like that it doesn't do much, unfortunately. And so it just becomes so difficult on trying to get things done that you're just going to find yourself struggling more often than not. Still, though, this deck is great, but it still relies on a lot to go right for it. But still, it counters those slower decks so effectively that I have placed this as the 4th best deck in this meta. So let me know what you think about that. But deck number 3, watch out. It is Steel Song. I love Steel Song, and I might be a little bit biased, especially because when I was making this ranking list, I was debating on either making Discard 3 or Steel Song 3. Aggro, Amethyst, Steel, definitely I feel like that is 5th no matter what. But I feel like you could easily argue that Steel Song or Discard could be number 3, and it could be intertwined one way or the other. Now, for me though, why did I put this higher than Discard? The biggest thing for me is consistency in this case. A lot of times when you're going against Discard, if you are on the draw going against Discard, there is just so much advantage that you have against Discard. Discard relies on going first, maintaining good card draw, and then still, even with that, a couple of things going right for you in order to get ahead in the process or in the game to be able to lock it down. And you have to do that, 2 out of 3 times in the game, and that can be very difficult to have to do. Steel Song though was really interesting because even so, I was at my locals and everything testing this deck like crazy, especially in the league that I run as well. And even going second, it still doesn't necessarily feel bad. The worst thing, of course, is that the Cinderella, in a lot of ways, is almost feeling a little bit of a dead card right now, in the sense of that if you go ahead and do a turn 1 Cinderella and then they go ahead and do a turn 1 Bell, or you're on the draw and they go ahead and do a turn 1 Bell, then you really almost need to rely on getting the Daisy Duck out instead. And that's also why even some people in these kinds of deck lists have been running the Nala, which is a 0/4, just to be able to maintain that turn 1 bonus against, against especially items or blue steel in general, just because of how prevalent, the bell being able to come out on turn 1 is, and then the bell being able to sing Let the Storm Rage On or Strength of a Raging Fire come turn 2 and pretty much take out any Cinderella that you want to throw at it. Still, though, I love the Troubadour. He is actually pretty good. The resist +1 does make a little bit of a difference. I'm not going to be saying a whole ton of a difference, but a little bit of a difference. And still being able to be a Singer 4 on turn 2 is really good. And of course, the aerial is going to be absolutely a great job with doing that, with getting you the actions that you need and the things that you need done. I find them, I flatten them also is a great song to be able to run into this deck, because you can go turn 2 Troubadour, and then if your opponent even just has like even one item out, and I tested this against one of my opponents at locals, and even stopping the Hiram from being able to draw 2 cards, and basically using I find my Platinum to get rid of even just one item in the beginning of the game, did a lot on slowing them down, especially when they were only having 1 or 2 cards, and that one card was a Hiram, and they were hoping to go up to 3 at that point. That can be a really big thing, but the bell is going to be your biggest problem. And if you know that you're going against blue steel and you're able to gather that intel as you go throughout your locals or your tournaments and things like that, then you can go ahead and prepare, especially in your mulligans, on trying to get those daisies, and even going like with that Smee turn 2, or even a Troubadour turn 2 isn't bad either, and then really just getting things going your way. In that matter. But, and I've been playing this at locals every week, and we've taken out, items on a regular basis with this. Even both games, I went 2-0 and took out items on the draw. The first game was definitely really close, and I had to be careful about how I played about it. But still, it was an absolutely great card. The one Naveen was actually putting in a ton of work in this case, being able to, even if worst came to worst, playing, a Strength of a Raging Fire. Cool. That's great. At the same time, the one Gantu was actually putting in a lot of work. People weren't necessarily able to sing Zeus's or anything like that for one entire turn. That's great. And on top of that, it does say that when you play this character, characters can't exert to sing songs until the start of your next turn. So the biggest thing with that, of course, is if you do have like your, Cindy's out, you do have your Ariels out, get your characters to sing their songs first, then play your Gantu, and then pass the turn after that. And it really slows them down. I had the competitor who was playing items ending up having to pay 3 for a popsicle. And it was just because he's like, I just have nothing else that I can do. I need this one card draw. I need to be able to quest with Hiram to be able to get this stuff done. And it was just able to slow things down so fast. And it's crazy too, because the Bagheera is really interesting with the bodyguard, because you're able to go so aggressive on your characters in the early game, and then Bagheera can come in as bodyguard and be a grab your swords. At the same time, it can also sing grab your swords. So if you do want to run 1 or 2 grab your swords, you're more than welcome to. It can also sing a whole new world and then protect everything else that you end up putting out. It's a great card. The Miss Bianca 5/5 for 4, because you have a lot of allies in this deck that you're able to easily get out and then just pay 4 for a Miss Bianca that's a 5/5. That was a very difficult stat line for especially items to have to deal with, because they didn't necessarily have something that they could just Sapphire Coil or whatever they needed to be able to get it taken care of. It was such a beast to be able to take down. And then, of course, Neverland. It's a very surprising item, but being able to be a 4 willpower location for 1 makes it so difficult to be able to get it taken care of quickly. And so you're probably going to be gaining 1, 2, maybe 3 lore. But there's been times that I've played this and people are just so worried about my board state. It's like, do I attack the Daisy or do I attack the Neverland? And there was times where I went like turn 1 Daisy, turn 2 Cindy, turn 2 Daisy, you know what I mean, turn 2 Cinderella and Neverland, and just went wide. And I'm like, well, there's my lore. You do you, man. Figure out what you want to do, and things of that nature as well. So it's really interesting to be able to see how this is going to go. The difficult part is, though, we do have some bad matchups in that case. And if you're not able to pilot this as well as you would hope, or if you just happen to start missing on a couple of card draws, this can be a very difficult deck because you get behind fast and it is so hard to catch up. If you also run out of cards and you do not hit that whole new world, it can be so difficult for you to be able to stay ahead. Now, deck number 2, so the second strongest deck. And I really was going to be maybe even putting this at the third, maybe the fourth, until I saw the tournaments this weekend on Ink decks. And, you know, this was the three, yeah, the 3K tournament. The top 3 were all Ruby Sapphire. And it made me actually take a step back and be like, wonder why that was. And upon looking at it, it's like, it was just really interesting. And the biggest thing for me was it didn't necessarily feel all that great when it first came into set 7 because it was trying to do almost too much. It just felt clunky. Last set in set 6, it was going so efficiently because you had your ramp up perfect. You know, you were able to go turn 1 Popsicle, turn 2 Tipo or Sail the Azurite Sea, turn 3 Hiram, draw 2. And the hardest part was the bell was almost hurting more than it was helping. Because either you got a 3-3 out on turn 1, cool, that's great, or you were getting your Hiram +2 card draw come turn 3. And the hard part was if you did the turn 1 bell, but you didn't do the turn 3 Hiram, it just felt so clunky and so difficult for you to continue to get ahead and build up your board state to that in-game, to the end game. And that's tough. With this instead, though, it's a very interesting combination. Especially, I love that the Maui Half Sharks. We almost have seen a bit of Maui Half Shark kind of taking a step back in a lot of ways, but in this case, that's not so at all. I gotta say though, the MVP and the best combo that I have seen in this matchup has been Madame Medusa with the Sapphire Coil. That is scary, plain and simple. The fact of the matter is that with just 1 ink, you can take out anything with 5 or less attack. That's scary. That's pretty scary. And to be able to do so, you're just looking at a huge uphill battle. Also, same with Sapphire Coil, going ahead and playing, the Sapphire Coil out, putting out an ink and whatnot, minusing 2 to a character of choice, and then going ahead and playing a Sisu. Woo, that's a little scary. And it's pretty good, not going to lie. And you're not necessarily flooding your board state with a ton of items. You definitely can go with a less item build, but this is more so just on getting that consistency. The Fishbone Quill, you don't necessarily even need to be playing the Fishbone Quill. You're only running, 12, 13 uninkables, if I remember correctly. And so you're not necessarily running around. But I feel like the biggest thing that was making Ruby Sapphire really struggle in that early game was the fact that it was trying to do too much in the early game and kind of lost focus at what this deck was designed to do. And it was very simple: ramp up and control the end game. And right now, the nice part is that we're seeing, this deck come back to that. And as soon as people took that step back, went back to what Ruby Sapphire was able to do, then they started winning their games again. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, especially on this coming weekend, if this deck can go ahead and get some more tournament wins. Because like I said, as we saw in the 3K tournament, it took the top 3 spots, which was really interesting. And so I think it could very well be back. And the biggest thing is, going against items in this case. Items is probably the hardest deck now to pilot in this meta. There's just so much that needs to go right for it. And if you do end up, there are so many options and avenues for you to go down, and you need to figure out which are the best ways for you to target your lines to be able to get things done properly. The nice part is that this counters so many of what you run into with items, or even what you run into with the Sapphire Steel aggro, that you're able to really make an impact. It's like, sure, you're going to get up to 8-10 lore, especially with blue steel aggro. But then after that, guess what? Maui Half Shark is coming out. Madame Medusa is going to be coming out. Sisu is going to be coming out. you're not even running Be Prepareds necessarily, and I would maybe be opting into running 2 in this list. I love this list otherwise. I would also be I would be okay with either taking out the 2 ice blocks, and adding 2 Be Prepareds, just because that makes such a difference. There's also different deck lists that ended up getting third, I think, in the 3K. That was a more action-heavy build. You saw the pirates and things of that nature as well, which did absolute wonders. And so it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I didn't necessarily think this was even going to be, the third, second, or first top deck in this matchup just because of how it had fallen out and how it was not performing well in the first 2 weeks of set 7. But now I feel like that we are going to be seeing this deck a lot more and coming back into the meta right now. So again, like I said, this weekend we'll see, but we'll see what it's able to do. Now, the final deck is, of course, yes, Blue Steel. If you didn't see that coming, sorry. But Blue Steel is going to be the number 1 deck in this meta. The main reason for that, of course, is just because both variants of this deck are just so good. You have, of course, the Aggro build, which is just absolutely insane. Then on top of that, you also have just the regular build where you can just go crazy on aggro and then just go ahead and get things done. The Ward of the Alice is just absolutely insane and things of that nature. But the biggest thing about items that's going to be really interesting here too is just that it has so much that it can do. Even if you do take out the Oswald, even if the Oswald doesn't necessarily find anything, you're still able to do an absolute lot with your deck. The Bell is still going to be able to sing a Let the Storm Rage On or a Strength of a Raging Fire come turn 2 if you so choose. You're still going to be able to get, the Smees out. You're going to be able to get a Pete out. You're going to be able to get the Hirams out, get the card draw, and just continue to get things going. The Tamatoa is so broken in this deck combination because you can just go ahead and get your 2 items out from the Banish Zone, play them out the following turn. He quests, you play a Lucky Dime out for free, you're able to use it that turn. And there was even one match in my league where I was going against Chassis and I was at 8 and he was at 15 and he was going with more of the aggro build and I was going the more item build and I was at 8, like I said, and I was able he took out my big Tamatoa with sending a Bell and a Zeus into it, except I had a Tamatoa in hand. So I went ahead and quested with my Happy as a Clam Tamatoa, played out the Lucky Dime for free, played out the big Tamatoa, played out 3 items, drew 3 cards, exerted Fishbone Quill, played an additional ink for turn, had the 2 left that I needed after all that ink. I was able to have the 2 final ink needed to activate Lucky Dime, to get up to 16, and then I quested with 4 characters to get up to 20. Insane. It's an OTK. If you don't watch out for this, and again, the Big Tomato is even so scary to have to go against, just with its 8 willpower is just absolutely insane. I mean, even still, we're seeing different variants of this deck that is going to be really interesting as well. The fact of the matter is, you could very well be seeing, where people aren't even running Lucky Dimes or Oswalds and Big Tomatoas, and they're just focusing more on just getting as many items out as they can, getting to the end game. There's even an item that's a 2-cost Sapphire item where you can sack it and give +2 lore to another character for the duration of the turn. Wow, okay, cool. So there's a lot that you can do here. And I mean, and it's just going to be a very consistent and good deck that you just got to be watching out for in almost every way. It's just a thrill to be able to play this deck. Not such a thrill to go against, but still, it's a great job. And both versions of this deck are just so powerful now that you have to be careful about when you're going against this deck and how you go ahead and face it. So yeah, guys, that's going to be the 5 decks. Again, just to rank it. Number 5, of course, was Amethyst Steel Aggro, followed by number 4 being Discard, number 3 Steel Song, number 2 Ruby Sapphire, and number 1 Blue Steel. What do you think about my list? Do you agree with everything that I said? If not, that's fine. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments on what you think your ranking would be. With that being said, guys, it was a great time. I'm excited to see how this meta continues to develop. Again, I really do think Ruby Amethyst is going to be coming back into this meta sooner rather than later. Just right now, people are a little scared about it. But, you know, that's to be expected. Not a big deal. But until next time, guys, it's going to be a great time, and I'm excited to see how this meta will continue to develop in Set 7. But until next time, guys, have a good one.